Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, we begin with politics and a major move by President Biden less than 2 months before he leaves office. The president has reversed course and signed a sweeping pardon order for his son, Hunter. We get more from Bloomberg News senior editor Bill Ferries.
For Hunter Biden, it really wipes the slate clean for basically the entire past decade. So that includes these gun and tax charges that he had been convicted on in some cases and pled guilty on in others. And it also includes anything, if there was anything out there that perhaps the legal system hadn't found at this point, it is really a complete and total pardon for all activities against breaking U.S. law since January 2014.
Bloomberg's Bill Ferries says the president reversed his previous stance that he would not use executive powers to aid his son. He justified the pardon by saying the case against Hunter was politically tinged, excessive, and designed to break him and his son.
Well, Nathan, reaction is pouring into the Hunter Biden pardon. Former federal prosecutor Lori Levinson says it should not be a surprise.
I think everyone needs to recognize that with the broad power that presidents have to issue pardons, they will use them for family members and they will use them for close friends because the Constitution gives them this broad pardon power.
Former federal prosecutor Lori Levinson says Hunter Biden was found guilty of gun charges by a federal court in Delaware earlier this year. His sentencing in that case was set to take place next Thursday.
And Karen, President-elect Donald Trump is criticizing Biden's decision. In a post on his Truth Social platform, Trump said, quote, "Does the pardon given by Joe to Hunter include the J6 hostages who have now been imprisoned for years? Such an abuse and miscarriage of justice," end quote.
Well, Nathan, a debate is brewing in Washington over President-elect Trump naming Kash Patel to take over the FBI. Patel has been outspoken against the FBI's investigation into possible Russian collusion with Trump's 2016 campaign. Republican Senator Mike Rounds notes Trump nominated the current FBI director Chris Wray, and he still has 3 years left on his term.
Once they've been nominated by the president, then the president gets the benefit of the doubt on the nomination, but we still go through a process, and that process includes advice and consent, which for the Senate means advice or consent sometimes.
Republican Senator Mike Rounds is a guest on ABC's This Week, heard Sundays on Bloomberg Radio.
And Karen, President-elect Trump is bringing someone that he has pardoned into his administration, nominating Charles Kushner as U.S. ambassador to France. The president-elect praised Kushner as a tremendous business leader, philanthropist, and deal maker. Kushner is the father of Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and former senior advisor. He served 2 years in prison for filing false tax returns, witness retaliation, and making false statements to the Federal Trade Commission. Trump pardoned Kushner near the end of his first term.
Nathan, President-elect Trump is issuing a tariff threat against the so-called BRICS nations if they try to move away from the dollar. In a post on Truth Social, Trump repeated a threat of 100% tariffs unless the BRICS promise not to create a new currency or back any other currency to replace the U.S. dollar. The group of emerging market nations that include Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa discussed de-dollarization at a summit last year. Despite the group's rhetoric, the infrastructure that backs the dollar, such as cross-border payments, will likely give the greenback the edge for decades to come.
Well, Karen, politics is also a major focus overseas. Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party in France has threatened to support a no-confidence motion against the French government unless Prime Minister Michel Barnier makes changes to next year's budget. But France's Finance Minister Antoine Armand tells Bloomberg News they will not accept artificial budget deadlines from Le Pen.
The French government doesn't take ultimatums. It's looking at the French parliamentary debate. It's respecting each and every parliamentary debate that leads to an evolution. We will take into account what is changing, but we won't be blackmailed. We are committed to reduce the deficit.
French Finance Minister Antoine Armand spoke with Bloomberg's Caroline Kona, and stocks in France right now are down 0.7%.
Let's turn to the markets now, Nathan, and stocks begin the last month of the year in record fashion. The S&P 500 rose 5.7% in November, its best month this year as investors plowed $141 billion into U.S. equities. So far this year, the S&P 500 is up 26.5%.
Right now, shares of Stellantis are down 8.5%. The automaker's chief executive officer, Carlos Tavares, is stepping down. More on that story from Bloomberg's Denise Pellegrini.
Tavares is quitting after profits slumped and U.S. sales weakened at the maker of Jeep SUVs and Fiat cars. And temporarily, the automaker will be run by an interim committee headed by Chairman John Elkann. Stellantis says a new CEO will be named in the first half of this coming year. Company also says Tavares' views on the carmaker's future differed from those of the board and some shareholders, and Stellantis is confirming its financial guidance for the year. Bloomberg News reported in October Elkann had begun a process to find a successor to Tavares, but Tavares later told reporters he would stay on until the end of his mandate in early 2026. Denise Pellegrini, Bloomberg Radio.
And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. There's increasing pressure on President-elect Trump to work with President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to free hostages in Gaza. In a new video, American-Israeli hostage Aiden Alexander asked Trump for help. And his father, Adi Alexander, spoke Sunday at a rally held in Central Park in New York City.
President Biden, President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, I call on all of you to act. This is not a moment for politics or hesitations.
Ali Alexander says no father should hear his child plead for his life like that. Meanwhile, a fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon remained in effect overnight. Overnight snowfall has buried western New York and Pennsylvania. One town in upstate New York already is seeing nearly 59 inches of snow. Frigid air that's passing over the relatively warm lake that triggered alerts and emergency declarations. In Erie, Pennsylvania, the National Guard was called up to rescue stranded drivers, where even plow drivers got stuck. Crews, including the U.S. Coast Guard and Alaska, are searching the cold waters southwest of Juneau for 5 people who are reporting that their fishing boat was overturning. High winds and heavy snow was reported in the search area. Coast Guard spokesman Petty Officer John Hightower says they received an urgent distress call from those aboard the 50-foot boat.
There was a Mayday report from the members of this vessel that's currently being searched for. They reported that the vessel was overturning, and that was all they got. Any further attempts to reach the vessel were not responded to.
The Coast Guard's John Hightower says the boat's GPS emergency beacon led them to the area now being searched. New information about a security breach at one of New York's busiest airports during the Thanksgiving travel rush. Authorities say a stowaway discovered on board a Delta flight out of JFK to Paris is a Russian national who lives in the U.S. and had not purchased a plane ticket. The woman remains in custody in France. Officials say she somehow bypassed the document check podium and the gate agent at JFK. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
Michael Barr, welcome back. It's good to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, nice to hear you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. Here's John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Today is Aaron Rodgers' 41st birthday. Yesterday at MetLife, and for much of this season, he has looked rather old. Though he did throw a pair of touchdown passes in the first quarter against Seattle, Rodgers also threw one in the second quarter that he'd like to have back.
Blitz is coming, throw inside, it's picked off. Leo Williams coming near side. He's running like a racehorse. He's at midfield, turns upfield, has blockers. Holy smokes, are you kidding? Leo Williams is going to take it in for a touchdown. Seahawks.
Cairo the call. Williams, the ex-Jet, with a 92-yard return, the longest in NFL history by a defensive lineman. The Seahawks came from 14 down, took their first lead with 5.5 minutes left. They beat the Jets 26-21. In the snow in Buffalo, the Bills beat the 49ers 35-10. The Bills have already clinched the AFC East. 8th straight win for Philadelphia, 24-19 at Baltimore. Saquon Barkley again over 100 yards at a 25-yard TD run in the fourth quarter. Washington ended a 3-game losing streak, a 42-19 rout at Tennessee. Tennessee. Minnesota with its second 5-game win streak came from 13 down, scored late, beat Arizona by a point. The Patriots lost by a point, a game with 7 lead changes. Indianapolis, a game-winning 80-yard, 19-play drive and a TD and 2-point conversion with 12 seconds left. Knicks back home from a long road trip, started a 4-game homestand, a 118-85 blowout of New Orleans. Mikal Bridges had his best game as a Knick, 31 points. He made 7 threes. At Barclays, Orlando beat the Nets 100-92. The Mets have a deal to sign free agent pitcher Frankie Montas, 2 years, $34 million. The Yankees acquired Montas from Oakland at the 2022 trade deadline. He only won 1 game in 8 starts. He was hurt for all but 1 start in 23, split this past season with the Reds and Brewers. From college football, West Virginia and Purdue fired their coaches. Purdue just went 1-11. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen and Nathan.
All right, John, thank you. S&P futures down 0.2% down 13 points. Dow futures down 0.1% or 52 points. NASDAQ futures down 0.2% or 48 points. 10-year Treasury yield 4.20%.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. It is a major reversal for a president who has said for months that he would not use his pardon powers to benefit family, even his own son.
I am satisfied that I'm not going to do anything. I said I'd abide by the jury decision, and I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
That was President Biden at the G7 back in June talking about his son Hunter. But last night, the president did indeed issue a sweeping pardon on tax and gun charges, saying in a statement, no reasonable person could conclude that his son Hunter was singled out for any other reason than that he is the president's son. For more, we are joined by Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw. Kevin, I guess the overarching question this morning is, why now? Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Nathan. I think that, it became very clear that President Biden is increasingly worried about what would happen to his son under a Trump presidency. We have already seen a situation where President-elect Trump has stated that he thinks the Justice Department was sort of weaponized against him, citing the various prosecutions and investigations into several different aspects of Trump's first term and surrounding events. And he's with a set of loyalists that he's been appointing to these key positions and talking about installing. I think President Biden just decided that he couldn't take the risk that his son was going to be part of sort of some ongoing set of probes, challenges, prosecutions, etc. It just creates an enormous challenge, though, for Democrats who are already very worried about how they were going to make sort of apply the rule of law and hold a second Trump term administration into account.
That puts this into the context then of President-elect Trump nominating a loyalist, Kash Patel, to be his next FBI director. Does that go into that context then?
Yeah, I think it does. I think when you start to look at some of the remarks that whether it's Kash Patel, obviously the Matt Gaetz appointment for Attorney General didn't work out, but Pam Bondi, these are extreme loyalists, and Trump has talked about wanting to, have that Justice Department be more responsive to the kinds of things that he thinks it should be, and when you have a set of people who have made it very clear that they think that there's more wrongdoing to be found. These are a number of the people that he's appointed and surrounded himself with have talked for a very long time about the Hunter Biden case and with all kinds of allegations of deeper corruption, et cetera, none of which they've really ever been able to substantiate. But obviously that wouldn't necessarily stop them from using it. And that really is a big difference in how the Justice Department has been run for the past couple of decades. And ever since the Nixon administration, there'd really been a sense that this needed to be a bit of a hands, sort of a distance between the White House and the Justice Department, of a little bit of an independence. After all, the Justice Department under Joe Biden is the one that investigated Hunter Biden, right? So there was a sense that that's what could happen. But Trump has talked about it in ways that are extremely different. And now it's going to be a challenge even more so for Democrats who've kind of lost a little bit of the moral high ground they may have otherwise had on this issue.
Yeah, for President Biden to say that no reasonable person could conclude but that the case against his son was politically motivated, does that add more fuel to the argument that the president-elect has been making that the justice system has been tainted by politics? Got about a minute left.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it at least gives him the ability to make that case more, and it's one more argument that Democrats and others would have to try to push back at. But we have seen continued complaints from Trump and his aides about the what they see as a politicized Justice Department. But obviously it now seems like they want to try to use it for their own purposes. You know, of course, it's not like Biden invented the pardon power. Trump used it quite intensively in his first term, including for several key loyalists and aides around him.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.